Happy Thursday, everyone. No, Roxy. We are in a room with bird lovers. No, Roxy. So that is the best kind of room to be in. We're going to really enjoy an amazing presentation, and it never ceases to amaze me just how many things we have access to in Key Biscayne. All these little gems, all these little, experiences that people travel the world to do, and we have them in our backyard. And I think that is one of the things that we're highlighting today, how much we need to support things like these and just, take a moment to enjoy, explore, learn things. That is what we need to be doing. I am going to turn the mic over to Ramya.
Anyway, I'll say it again, in case you don't. My name is Ramya. I'm the Director of Environmental Science for the Key Biscayne Community Foundation. As you guys know, we do these citizen science lectures once a month. Today we have Steffanie from the bird banding station at Bill Baggs. Bill Baggs, of course, my favorite place on the island. I talk about it all the time. Before we get to Steffanie, Julie Bracken from Friends of Cape Florida is going to give her a bit of an introduction. So I will hand it off to Julie.
Thank you, Ramya. So I am grateful and privileged to also be a volunteer at the Cape Florida Banding Station. And you're going to learn a little bit more about it. But one of the things I wanted to say is that, remember when we used to be the youngest ones in the room? And remember when we say, what are those young people doing? Well, this is just another example how wonderful the young people are in this next generation coming in and their passion for the environment. And we see that with Ramya and all the many things she brings to us. But today, I would like to introduce Steffanie. She is not only our bander in charge of this station, she is our leader. And again, I'm privileged to be a volunteer with the group. And her bio reads incredibly well. Dr. Steffanie Munguia is an experienced Latina environmental advocate and conservative professional working across the hemisphere, not just in South Florida, but the hemisphere, to build a more inclusive environmental movement. Born in Puerto Rico, she was raised in Central Florida. Her passion for conservation grew from an early love of birds and weekend camping trips, and it grew into a career. Over the years, she has worked as an environmental educator, social scientist, and a student engagement leader. She is now the Avian Conservative Programs Manager for Zoo Miami, where she supports their existing partnerships with bird conservation programs in Latin America and the Caribbean, while developing new programs in South Florida. Steffanie, again, is our bander in charge, and just so you know that she does this as a volunteer, and she gets up and is out the door at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning to get there to set up. But you'll hear more about that. So let's give a round of applause to Steffanie.
Thank you so much, Julie. Hello, everybody. Good. I love the energy. Buenas tardes. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to get to talk to you a little bit more about the Cape Florida Banding Station, but more broadly about what I think is one of the most miraculous things that happens in the animal kingdom, which is bird migration. It's a really fascinating thing that these species are undergoing, and just as Ramya said, you're really blessed to live on this key. You're getting to experience, perhaps you've not paid as much attention to it before, but maybe after this talk you will. You're getting to experience one of the most magnificent things that the natural world has to offer right here on this key. So we'll talk a little bit about these mighty migrations and the role that Key Biscayne plays in the journeys that these songbirds are undertaking. So let's begin with a little bit of a crash course in ecology. Don't worry, you do not have to be a scientist to get through this talk, and I will try my best to be less of a scientist so we all get through this talk awake. So we're going to talk a little bit about how and why these birds travel so far, and I'll get into the specifics of where they're going in a minute, so we'll try not to skip ahead too much. But why are they even doing this? A couple of really interesting things is that just as we drive on highways and we follow major paths to wherever it is that we're going, birds are actually doing the same thing. And they have their pick. They could technically fly anywhere in the sky, right? But there are certain places. Any of you sailors in here or have been on a boat, have had to navigate that way? At least one. Okay, fantastic. You're surrounded by water, so hopefully this will not be surprising to you. In much the same way that sailors navigate using prevailing winds, birds will do the same thing. So they're taking advantage of these prevailing wind currents that will help them get further, faster, with the least amount of energy expended. And that's super important. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. So just to point out some of these major flyways that are in the United States specifically, we've got the Pacific Flyway, which as the name suggests, runs along the Pacific coast of the US, all the way from Alaska, all the way down. And this actually does continue. As Julie said, I work hemispherically, so this does continue all the way down to Chile. But for our purposes, we'll focus here in the Northern Hemisphere. We've got the Central Flyway that covers what probably most of us would think of as the Mountain West and Southwest. The Mississippi Flyway that follows along the Mississippi River, huge flyway, very active. And then we are located right along the Atlantic Flyway. You'll see an interesting thing happens down here for us, where we're kind of both in that blue and green. We're both Atlantic and Mississippi. But most of the birds that we encounter out here on Key Biscayne are riding that Atlantic Flyway, those prevailing winds, all the way down from where they were born, somewhere in Pennsylvania, New Jersey for the most part, all the way down through Florida to the Bahamas, Cuba, all the way to Puerto Rico, into the smaller islands. Some of them will even cut across into Mexico. But for most of ours, they are headed to the islands for the winter, which is a fantastic place to spend the winter, if I do say so myself. It's a fantastic place to spend all year, but Key Biscayne's a pretty close second. A really interesting thing that happens is a lot of people think of bird migration as being a thing that birds do together, right? We're used to seeing videos and photos of geese, for example, flying in that V formation, right? So we think of migration as always being a collective activity. What's really unique about songbirds is that it actually is an individual activity. They all just happen to be taking advantage of the same weather conditions at the same exact time. That can be millions of birds doing that at the same exact time. In fact, it can be so many birds doing it at the same exact time that if you look at weather radar on peak migration nights, you will see flocks of birds that appear as if they were rain clouds forming out of nowhere right at sunset. And they look a little bit interesting. They form these little, like you can see, these little green, somewhat circular areas. There is no rain on the horizon. You can see what rain looks like, right? It looks like these little bands. That's more typical for weather. But these perfect little circles are a bunch of birds that all decided on their own that the winds were just right, the conditions were just right, that tonight they were going to fly south. And right at sunset, they all take off. They reach their cruising altitude at about the same time, and they all start heading south. And this little circle is going to dissolve into something like a little arc that just makes its way down and eventually dissipates. But it's a really cool thing that we can actually study this, and there are scientists who focus on crunching the numbers to turn these into really cool data visualizations. So if you're ever interested and you want to Google a little thing called birdcast during migration, right now it's a little bit boring, but birdcast, just like forecast, will tell you how many birds are in the air that night, both predicted and also looking back. And you can see them move through the entire continental United States. But how are they doing this? How do they navigate? If any of you are anything like me, navigation is not always easy. I use Google Maps a lot. Maybe you use atlases. Birds don't have the benefit of either of those tools, unfortunately. So what they are using are actually what our forefathers, former generations used to use. They were navigating using celestial bodies as their cues. So they're using the stars and the sun. In some cases, some birds are really sensitive to magnetic forces, so they can actually detect magnetic north. If you've learned about homing pigeons, for example, the best way to mess up a homing pigeon and make sure it doesn't make it to its destination is to hold a magnet next to its brain. It will be completely confused. Not a nice thing to do either, but it is a form of sabotage that was used. They will also use topographical landmarks. This is the one I can most relate to. I feel like I recognize every single tree out on our banding station grounds, and that is the only way I get from one net to the other. And they will use wind direction. So as I mentioned before, those prevailing winds are really important because as long as the wind is blowing south, it's going to take them south, and they're going to get to where they need to go. Now, if something happens like a hurricane and those winds are disrupted and they're being blown out further east than they expected, now a bird that might have been headed to Cuba is going to end up in the Bahamas for the winter. Thankfully, not a bad place to end up either, but if that was not your destination, it's a little disconcerting. Now, to be able to actually do this, there are a lot of things that are happening inside their bodies, to their physiology, that are really unique to birds compared to a lot of other migrating animals. Birds have to cover large distances in a single burst while being a really small body, warm body, so they also have to expend energy in maintaining their body temperature, and they have an extremely fast metabolic rate. Anybody ever had a pet bird? Yeah. A couple of you? Okay. They have more frequent bowel movements than humans do, right? We can be honest about that. They are constantly eating and releasing what they just ate. So if you are a bird that has to fly across all the way down from Key Biscayne all the way to the Bahamas or to Hispaniola, that's going to require a great deal of food, and you can't necessarily carry all that food with you. You don't have grocery bags. But they do have an amazing capacity to build up their muscle mass and their fat. So we like to say at the banding station that we love fat birds. It is one of the best places to be a little bit on the heavy side because it's great. Yeah. We do have a lot of nesting birds here. These in particular don't tend to nest here, but we do have some similar looking birds that do. This is a red-eyed vireo. This is actually probably going to spend its winter months somewhere in Central America. A lot of them end up in Costa Rica. But we do have a few like black whiskered vireos, similar birds to these that will nest on the key. So that might be them. So when they are migrating, they are putting on a bunch of fat. And what I'm actually going to point out to you is a little bit of what a bander looks at, because the way we see a bird is very different from how probably any of you have ever looked at it. Birds have extremely thin skin, which allows us to directly look in and see the muscle mass and the fat. So in this picture here on the right-hand side, this is that same bird. This right here, does that look familiar to anybody who has eaten a chicken? Maybe actually had to butcher it yourself? Yeah, that's the breastbone. This is the wishbone, if you were fighting over it at Thanksgiving. Right in here, that area right above the wishbone fills up with fat. This area right below, right over their abdomen will fill up with fat, and they'll also develop fat on either side of their bodies. On either side of the breastbone is their pectoral muscle. That's what actually is going to enable them to power their flight because it's a lot of flapping. But this fat is what they're going to hopefully burn through first as they're flying. And when I say they gain weight, I mean they can do it really, really quickly. Some species might triple or quadruple in weight in just a couple of days to be able to prepare for a migration. Thankfully, that does not happen to me when I get particularly hungry. Hopefully it doesn't happen to any of you. To accommodate that, they will also shrink any of their non-essential organs. So if you didn't need your kidney for a little bit and could just reabsorb it, that makes a lot of space for some additional fat. They also have really efficient respiratory and circulatory systems. Birds can take advantage of a much higher percentage of oxygen in the air that they breathe than we can, which is why we have some species of birds that can fly over the Himalayas. And if you ever tried to make it to base camp at Everest, you would have a hard time without an oxygen tank. Some birds can fly for upwards of 24 hours. It's actually not super uncommon. And I'm going to tell you one example of a really extreme case where they far exceed that record. And it is an extreme case that we get to see here. Pretty much all the photos that you'll see in this presentation of birds in a hand were taken out at the banding station. So I'm not exaggerating when I say it is literally in your backyard. This bird is a black-poll warbler, and it has probably one of the most studied and fascinating migrations of any of our small songbirds that transit through Florida. So this little bird, many of them are born in the boreal forests of Canada. That's where they're going to spend their summer. Some of them might come a little bit further south into the United States, but for the most part, these birds are Canadian born. We like to joke that it's kind of hard to define a nationality for birds, especially our migratory birds, because a Canada warbler, for example, that is its actual name, born in Canada, is also going to spend half of its year in Colombia. Is a Canadian, is a Colombian, it's Colombian, it's both. So this little black-poll warbler was born up in Canada. It's going to fly south for the winter. Notice they do something different. They don't take the same route in that fall migration as they're going to take on the way back. There are good reasons for that. Prevailing winds also shift seasonally. But their fall migration is what's most exciting. They're going to hit somewhere around South Carolina, the upper Southeast or the lower Mid-Atlantic, and they're going to decide, you know what? I'm good. I don't need land underneath me. I don't need a safety net anymore. And from South or North Carolina, they can take off and fly all the way to Venezuela or Brazil without stopping.
How long does that take?
Normally takes them about 2 to 3 days. I do not have the endurance to do anything for 2 to 3 days without stopping, but they do, and they also have a lot of other things that allow them to do that. Birds can shut off half of their brains and rest one hemisphere and let the other one do the work and then switch off. Dolphins do that as well. Sadly, not a function that has been given to us yet, but you never know. Evolution might come for us eventually. So they'll do that. They'll spend their winter down in Venezuela, Colombia, northern Brazil, and then in the spring they will fly back up. And this time they decide, you know what? I'm about to land in Canada and try to find a mate and try to make babies and then have to raise all these whiny babies. They're going to take an easier route back. So they island hop all the way back up to Canada, and that makes that transition much easier. And typically we see more of them in the spring as a result because they're actually going to stop in Florida. So I've been mentioning a lot about stopping. So scientifically, we refer to these places that these birds are landing during their migration as stopover sites. Now these can come in lots of different flavors. Some cases, which we call fire escapes, are literally just a place to land and wait out a bad weather system, for example. If you sense there's a hurricane coming, it's probably a good time to get down on land. Unfortunately, they don't always sense that there's a hurricane coming, and actually quite a few of them were caught up in Melissa. You could see the blobs of birds caught in the eye of the storm. In the case of a storm as big and powerful and destructive as Melissa, those birds probably did not make it, unfortunately. However, in a lot of other cases, they might get caught in the eye and kind of ride in the eye for a little bit until the storm begins to disintegrate around them, and then they can fly through the eye wall and make it out the other side. Or they'll try to bail out and get onto land if that eye happens to be overland. But it is pretty remarkable that they have adapted and have survived for millennia dealing with hurricanes. So a fire escape can literally just be a window ledge. It's just something to grab onto. They might only spend a few hours there. Then we have things like convenience stores. This is like your Quickie Mart, your 7-Eleven. If you are just really craving a hot dog, but you got to get back on the road, you might stop at a convenience store. It's small, it's isolated. It doesn't have all the options of a Walmart or a Publix or a Whole Foods, but it's going to get you there. That's all you really need. And it provides these refueling services. So if you have a network of little convenience stores along the way, that is fantastic when a bird is planning to continue migrating over land. You can make it from one 7-Eleven to the next one and probably be fine on your hot dogs and Funyuns. But beyond that, if you have to go a longer distance, you're going to want to stock up on something that's a little bit more nutritious. And that's where a full-service hotel will come in. You're going to get the full experience. You're going to be pampered. You're going to get some sleep, hopefully. Bill Bags is, it turns out, operating as a full-service hotel, which is really, really great. When the banding station was established in 2003, it was actually to answer the question, is the state park functioning as any of these? And which is it? Because we've invested a lot of money into restoring this habitat. It better be working for somebody, right? Beyond just, of course, our enjoyment. So it turns out it is working really well for our migrating birds. It is a high quality habitat. It can support many birds, literally thousands of them at a given time, fueling up on strangler fig fruit and coffee berries and anything else they can find to build up that fat load and build up their muscle. We already talked a little bit about weather and migration. We like to think that we understand a lot about bird migration, and frequently I will text my crew, Julie knows this, and I'll be like, we have nice strong north winds, it's gonna be a good day tomorrow, and then I get out there and we're completely skunked and there are no birds. So winds are only one part of the equation. They are really, really smart. They're going to take advantage of a north wind that's blowing them south because they don't have to work as hard. And sometimes they'll take such good advantage of it that they decide they don't need to stop here at all, which can be frustrating for the banding station, but is really great for the birds, so we can't be mad about it. Now, if they have winds blowing out of the west, it can push the birds out over the ocean, and some birds will detect that and get a little bit nervous and say, you know what? I'm not heading to the Bahamas. I'm supposed to be going to Cancun. I told my buddies I'd be there in a few weeks. And they will stop in Key Biscayne and wait until the winds shift around to make sure that they can make it where they want to go. So if they're within sight of land, they'll collect in these places. And I'll show you in a minute what Cape Florida looks like from a bird's perspective, and it'll make a lot of sense why they stop here. So if you are a bird flying down along the barrier keys off the coast of Florida, there's a lot of development here, there's a lot of development here. Then all of a sudden you see these nice little green patches. And then when you're looking out over the horizon, just beyond this last nice little green patch, which is Billbag State Park, you might realize there is nothing out there but water. And if you are not fat enough and you don't have enough muscle, that is not a good proposition. So that is actually why the banding station is located here, because birds see this as their last place to bail out. It's like that sign when you're about to go on the overseas highway into the Keys, it says last gas station for however many miles. It's that. We are the last gas station. Thankfully, it looks really beautiful to birds as well as us. Now, I mentioned that part of why the banding station was established was to answer the question of whether this restoration was working. Have any of you, some of you, been on the Keys since Andrew or know what this looked like? Okay. So I don't need to tell you how destructive that storm was. Now, before Andrew, the area that is now Billbag State Park, Billbag Cape Florida State Park, was covered in Australian pine. And while that was great for shade and people seemed to enjoy it, it was really, really not great for wildlife. It does not provide any useful food for birds. It provides a little bit of structure and habitat, but not really anything that was going to help these migrating birds. But it was really expensive to remove Australian pine. So for a while, the state park system literally could not afford to improve this area. The only, perhaps, silver lining of Hurricane Andrew is that it took care of one of the most expensive things about that. The trees came down. They had to be removed anyways. And it sort of forced the state park's hand, and they restored and replanted in some cases, and in other cases just waited for the natural seed bank to prop up new plants in its place. So we went from something that looked like this, something that today looks like this, which is pretty remarkable. And it's really exciting to be able to share that story with our volunteers at the banding station, that these trees, in most cases, are younger than most of us who are out there. Some cases, they're older. We do have a high schooler. He does not remember what this looked like. But it is really exciting to show that this restoration has worked with the data that we're gaining from these birds. So how exactly do we band birds? Why are we handling them? I've just spent all this time telling you how migration is fascinating, how they have to do all of these things. They have to shrink their non-essential organs. They have to fatten up. They have to fly for days and turn off half of their brain. Why in the world would anybody think it's a good time to handle them and stress them out? It's a good question. It's a great ethical dilemma that any bird scientist has to wrestle with, but hopefully this will help you understand why that data is so valuable and makes it worthwhile, and also all of the steps and precautions we take to make sure that our volunteers are minimizing that stress. First and foremost, all of this is done with proper permitting and training. Julie can attest to this. We put them through the ringer to make sure that they know exactly how to handle birds. Most of our volunteers have never touched a bird in their life before they come out to the station. So we take a lot of time to make sure that they understand how to handle birds safely. We also take a lot of time convincing the powers that be that we are the right people for the job. We have to have 3 permits to operate at Billbag Cape Florida State Park. One of them is the federal permit that tells people that we understand what bird banding is and we know how to do it. It's issued to us by the U.S. Geological Service. The other permit is the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission's state level permit that allows us to do those banding operations in the state of Florida. And the last permit is a state park permit, because the state park also has to take care of its resources, and they are very concerned with making sure that any research operations that are happening in the parks are going to be supportive of their mission to steward these resources wisely. The 3 levels of permits, a whole bunch of training. So what do we train them to do exactly? Well, we show people 2 primary ways of holding songbirds. These are both great examples of the average size of birds that we're dealing with out there, somewhere in the middle of this. Now, if I just showed you these 2 photos without any context, which of the photos do you think is the safest way to hold the bird? Which is the least stressful way? Raise your hand if you think it's the left. Raise your hand if you think it's the right. Okay, there were a lot of people who didn't raise their hands, but there were a few more who thought it was the bird on the left. And you are right. Good job. This is a very secure way to hold a bird. The bird is actually least stressed when it's in this position because it doesn't feel like it has the chance to get away, so it's not trying to actively flap and get away from you. The bird in this position, which is called the photographer's grip, is really trying to calculate its escape and actively trying to get out of your hands. Unfortunately, this photo does not do very well on social media. It gets a lot of questions about, why are you strangling that bird? We're not, I promise. We train our volunteers to make sure that we are never strangling the bird. Also, birds, like 50% of what looks like their body mass is actually just feathers. Like, we're just fluffing some feathers down. They're really fine. But this is a very secure way to hold a bird. It just invites a lot of questions. Also, the bird on the right, you can see a lot more of its features. That's why it's called the photographer's grip. It is the preferred grip when you are taking a photo of a bird. So those are the two primary ways we train volunteers, but I wanted to show you a really funny one because I had been waiting for years for my opportunity to finally practice this one, and it just happened last week. Now this hold has a great name. It's called the ice cream cone hold. And you can only use it on raptors of a certain size. This was a Cooper's hawk that we caught and banded over the weekend. And you can tell she was not particularly thrilled. But I was very thrilled. This just absolutely made my season. And it does look a little bit like an ice cream cone. So taken to calling it a Cooper's pop now instead of a Cooper's hawk, but she was safely released. She has a great backstory. If you want to find me after the talk, I'll tell you all about how she brought her lunch into the net with her and scared our volunteers. But she is out in the wild doing great and hopefully getting back to her lunch. I've shown you the birds in the hand, but we are not just walking around the forest, jumping into trees and grabbing them. Obviously, I do not have that skill set. So we capture them using something called a mist net. This is exceptionally hard to see on a regular basis. It's also really hard to see on a tiny screen in the front of the room, so maybe only the people in the front row can see it. But can you see a net in the picture on the left?
No.
Very vaguely. Yeah, so this right here on the end, that's the pole, and there's some horizontal lines here. That is the net. So they're called mist nets because, like the mist, they're virtually invisible. They're light. They're very easy to think you're going to walk through. And believe me, many of our volunteers, myself included, have. Even we sometimes do not see the nets, and we actually know where they are. So that is what allows us to capture these birds. And so we check these nets on a 20-minute basis to make sure that birds aren't in there being stressed out for a long period of time. And then our volunteers come along and they find a bird. There's a black-throated blue warbler. And they extract the bird from the net safely. There's a whole way that we do this. It makes sure that the bird is not being injured, that we're not straining or stretching the wings or legs in ways that they shouldn't. And the whole process should take less than 2 minutes. Sometimes catbirds come along and they test us. But for the most part, it is really quick, and that helps to mitigate that stress we were talking about. Then we put them in individual bags. Obviously, we're not going to put birds together, and definitely never put a predatory bird in the same bag with a prey bird. That is just a mean thing to do. But we place them in these individual breathable bags. What this does is it limits their visual stimuli. Anybody work with horses? Been around horses before? Okay, what do you do about a nervous horse? How do you try to reduce that nervousness if you're going to walk it through a crowded place? Yeah, you put something over their eyes, you put blinders. So unfortunately, they don't make blinders in warbler size, but they do make bags which hold warblers. So we put them in the bags, and that effectively functions as blinders. So that allows us to walk them back to the tent. They'll wait actually surprisingly calmly until it is their turn to be processed by the bander. And that processing time should be really quick. When we are banding at high speed on a really big day, I can churn out a bird every 20 seconds. So it's fast. And in those 20 seconds, I will gather a lot of data, but our first priority is always the bird's safety. If I feel like that bird is too stressed out, if that bird is not in good shape, our first priority is always going to be to make sure that that bird can get out there, get what it needs to be able to continue its journey, even if that means I'm not going to get the wing cord on that bird. It's fine. So while I've got this bird in my hands, I am trying to ascertain a few things. All species, I will be able to tell you by the time I'm done with it how old it is, within reason. I'm not going to tell you if it's 7 years old or 2 years old, but I will tell you if it's in its first year of life or after that. Net 14. Reach in and I'm going to try to figure out where the head of the bird is and very carefully get it into that secure bander's grip that I showed yesterday in the presentation.
Does it peck you when you're in there?
Sometimes it does. This one's being very cooperative, surprisingly. Just doesn't want to let it go of the back. We shake that out because they frequently do poop or lose some feathers in there. And so I've got this nice secure hold on the bird. I'm going to separate one leg, put the band on, and you'll see I kind of rotate the pliers around as I do so just to make sure it's going to be a comfortable fit. And it's not too tight, not too loose. Make sure it is closed evenly how I want it so it's not going to get snagged on anything. And that's the bird with the band on it already, so that's quite quick. Then we're going to take a measure of the wing length or wing chord. And you'll see I'm not flattening the wing, I'm just pressing it on, just putting it on the ruler and letting it run naturally. That's 86 wing chord. I'm going to blow the feathers as we did with that black-throated blue female. Peck 5, fat T.
And the purpose of blowing the feathers?
Is to be able to see the amount of pectoral muscle and fat that they are carrying. And in the case of catbirds, we have several different things that we look at to age them. We cannot sex them. This is one of those species that because we are not on their breeding grounds, we'll never know if we're handling a male or a female. This is a gray catbird, and the reason for that is it is gray and it sounds like a cat. Its call is that meowing sound that we heard over by the bathrooms. So we look inside the mouth and see if it's pale or dark. That's, again, relative. The eyes, if they're brown or dark, again, relative. Most important thing is I'm going to look at its wing in the light and look to see if it has anything called a molt limit, which means that there are feathers that do not look consistent with the other feathers in the same sequence. This bird does not appear to have a molt limit, so we're going to call that an after hatch year. So that means this bird is not in its first year of life. It's at least in its second fall migration right now. And we're going to do, oh, this was also red butt.
Oh.
I talked about that red butt earlier.
Oh,
They're very striking birds.
oh, pretty.
They're quite pretty.
And what does a red butt mean again?
It's just one of their identifying characteristics. They do like to perch frequently. Well, right now he's fanning his wings out, but they'll frequently be perching like this with their tail kind of lifted. So it's a good way to identify that it's a catbird. It's got the black cap, gray body, and the red booty. All right, and then we're going to go in.
Oh,
It's just how they like to hold themselves. Different birds have sort of different preferred poses.
my goodness. What does that do?
36.8 grams.
She's weighing it.
Hey, chunky.
He is chunky, which is great. And then one more thing that we're doing right now, like we said, this is science. This is a research project. So we like to contribute to research as best we can. One of those projects is something called the Bird Genescape Project, which is currently collecting feathers from all sorts of different migratory birds across their migration pathways, their wintering habitats, and their breeding habitats to try to understand on a more granular level which birds go where for different parts of their life history cycle so we can better protect those habitats. So in this case, they are looking for feathers from a gray catbird, so I am going to pull 2 feathers from this bird. It is very quick. They ask for 2 very specific feathers from the tail. That's partly to mitigate feather loss that is important. Like you wouldn't want to pull a flight feather because they need that to be able to create lift. They do need their tail for steering, but it's not as necessary. And also because they grow in at different times in their life cycle. So I'm going to pull this feather.
Oh.
It's very quick. It's sort
It
of
doesn't
like
hurt?
probably about as much as having like a small lock of your hair pulled out. 5, 4, 3, 2, and feather 1.
That was a
All right, and that's it.
Feather.
Yes. All right, so this bird is done. Andres, would you like
So-
to hold on? We have not
Do you want me
encountered before.
to
That's why we have to
go
look
out
at it.
and I can go out and put him.
I just want to get a close up of him, Andre.
Yes,
Okay,
if
which
you do
direction are you
want
gonna let him
post
go?
anything, we have, like, full
I was
instructions on the paper
planning to
that's
go
posted
this
on the
way.
street. They fly away, they are all doing really great, as far as we know. For some species, we can also tell the sex. So I can tell you right now in this photo, these are true prairie warblers. This is a adult male prairie warbler, and this is a first year male prairie warbler. You see these little rusty spots on the back? That is an adult feature. That is one of the features that a female is going to use to decide that this male is a good, worthy mate. This one doesn't have those rusty spots yet. Every single species is different, so banders have to learn a lot to be able to sit in the chair. We also take measurements of their size with something that is called wing chord, which is the length of the wing when it's not flattened up against a ruler, which probably sounds easier than it actually is. This bird seems like he's being very well behaved. That's a Chuck-Will's widow. It's one of the weirdest things that we get to encounter out at the banding station. Not a songbird. It's actually a nocturnal bird, but we are opening nets before sunrise very, very early in the morning, so we sometimes get them too. So we measured the length of their wing, and that gives us a proxy of their size. That is actually really, really useful information because it's things like that that have enabled scientists to determine that due to climate change, blackpoll warblers are actually changing their anatomy. Their mass is decreasing. So all of the other features of this bird are becoming more and more petite, but one thing stays the same or lengthens. It's their wing chord, because they have to fly further. So it is beneficial to them to be smaller but have longer wings because they're losing habitat and they are battling with more and more climate-induced effects, and as a result of that, their actual bodies are changing. So that's how that data gets put to use. We also look at conditions, so just like that photo of the red-eyed vireo I showed you before with the muscle versus the fat, the bander is going to blow the feathers out of the way, look through the skin, and assign a score. And then we weigh them. For about 2 seconds, they go in a little PVC tube upside down. It makes for a really cute photo, but thankfully they're not in there for very long. So while the bird is in the hand, perhaps the most important thing that we do is we actually put a band on it. That's why it's called bird banding. Every band is going to have a 9-digit number. These are serial, sequential, and administered by one agency, the Bird Banding Lab, the USGS, to make sure that all banders that are using these bands all across the United States, or if you are a US bander who is working in Peru, you might apply these bands there too, that we have one centralized source of information. And one of our responsibilities is to submit all of our data at the end of the season so that anybody who ever finds one of these birds, whether they be a bander or somebody strolling along downtown in a busy city with lots of skyscrapers and tragically finds a bird that has been involved in a window collision, they can read that band and report the band to the Bird Banding Lab. And then the Bird Banding Lab will mail you a certificate as the person who found the band, and they will send me an email saying, "We found your bird." Hopefully alive, sometimes dead, but both data points are really helpful to us because if I banded that bird 10 years ago, now I know, hey, that ovenbird actually lives at least 10 years. That's how we have age records and how we know how long most of these birds live. And these bands go on a non-invasive location on the bird's body. It goes right on the leg. Bird anatomy is a little bit weird, but it's essentially the equivalent of our calf. So it's not in any of the bendy bits. It's sized precisely to rotate around the calf without getting stuck, but also is not so big that it's going to go up over the joint or down over the feet and impede motion. And then the birds are safely released back into the wild. And I keep emphasizing safely and safety because it is super important to us. It's probably one of our #1 priorities other than making sure that our volunteers stay alive and well in the field as well. And they fly off quite well, 99% of the time if we're doing our jobs right. And thankfully, because of all these data that have been collected from banding stations, we actually do know scientifically that it does not impact their survivorship. It doesn't impact their ability to reproduce. Because a lot of people have asked me the question, like, doesn't a female bird find it kind of odd that this guy just has a metal ring? Doesn't that seem kind of weird? Turns out, doesn't really matter to them either way, which is really, really great news for us because it means we can keep getting data and they can keep making babies. So banding has helped us learn a lot over the years. You can see the band on the leg of that little red star right there.
The band, the metal band, not irritate the
And the weight.
No, thankfully it does not seem to cause any irritation. Like I said, it's just loose enough where it is making contact with the skin, but it's not rubbing up against the skin. And the weight is a really great point as well. The bands are made out of aluminum, so they're extremely lightweight. It actually is maybe less than 0.1 or 2% of a bird's body weight. So it does not impede their ability to move at all, which is really important. If you get into more advanced techniques of studying birds, like putting little radio backpacks on them so you can study their movements more precisely, even then you're only allowed to put a radio tag on a bird that is less than 5% of its total body weight, so it won't impact them. So through all of these different banding and other scientific techniques, we have learned how birds disperse. So we know, for example, that a Swainson's warbler that was born in Virginia might fly to Missouri and then end up in South Florida. We know what their migration patterns are, like we already saw with the blackpoll warbler. We know that in the fall it's going to fly south from the boreal up in Canada to North or South Carolina, take off from there and fly all the way to Venezuela, Colombia, Brazil without stopping, and then in the spring going to take the easy route back up. In some cases, we can also use color banding if we have a small population of birds that are in one location, and you're more interested in understanding their social dynamics. I was trained as a social scientist. I find that really fascinating as well. So we can figure out who's the bully on the block, who's the male who's getting the most females. Are these babies really his, or has she been having some affairs? So all of these things are really, really helpful to learn, and we can find those things out with color banding, which is when we put not only the metal band on the leg of the bird, but we also add some extra little pops of color on both legs so that they end up with a unique combination of 4 bands total in most cases. And still, not heavy. We also have been able to use bird banding to determine lifespan. We have a few longevity records under our belt at the banding station. We just actually, we've had a cardinal that is at least 13 years old that lives out on bill bags with us. We've had some oven birds that have come back after 12 years from being banded. So we know that remarkably they are surviving and doing quite well for long periods of time.
What's the average lifespan of a bird?
It varies by the bird. So if anybody has had parrots, you know there's a range. If you commit to a cockatiel, it's really different from committing to a macaw. So it's the same thing with songbirds. It's much easier to answer those questions with birds that we are able to keep in captivity, obviously, because we get to spend their entire lives with them. We get to see them from birth all the way till death. With wild birds, we don't get that luxury, so that's where bird banding comes in and helps us to learn that. For most of our songbirds, small passerines are going to be living anywhere from 10 to 15 years, if they're lucky. Many of them are not that lucky.
So do they require sleep?
They do. So do I. They all do. Anything requires sleep. They do have really specific physiological and anatomical things that allow them to sleep in really safe ways. And there are crazy examples out in the bird world, like hummingbirds require sleep so bad that they actually hibernate, quote unquote, every single night. It's a thing called torpor. They slow down all of their bodily processes because otherwise a hummingbird has to be eating all the time, constantly, right? If you see them at your feeders or in your fire bush, they're constantly sipping nectar. They can't do that all night long. They do have to sleep. So they go into something that's almost like a mini hibernation. And you can literally walk up to a hummingbird on a branch and just kind of knock it, just tap it, and he kind of like wobbles, opens one eye, and decides to go back to sleep. And then in the morning, he'll wake up again and be just fine. So yes, they do need sleep. They have really creative ways of getting it.
How long does an African gray last,
Depends. With good care, 50, 60 years. I have an African gray.
What are the natural or invasive species that are the predators of these birds?
Oh, that is a really, really good question. Thank you for asking that, because it's also something we have to think about a lot when we're misnetting them. We have to think about, are we putting them in danger? Natural predators, yes, of course they have many. They are part of the food chain like everything else. That Cooper's hawk in the ice cream cone hold that I showed you loves a tasty little bird morsel. They're actually specialists in feeding on birds. They're really agile and able to pursue birds. Now, because they're so small, they're not often worth all of that effort, but a bird that is sleepy or a bird that is unhealthy is an easy target for just about anything. Snakes might eat a bird that's unprepared. Out at the banding station, because we are capturing them in nets, we have to be really, really careful because sometimes you might inadvertently be serving that bird up on a platter. I have heard two really interesting stories just in the last year. One banding station where a barred owl learned the locations of the nets and would just perch right above the net and wait for a bird to be caught, and then reach in and grab it. And in that case, the bander did also end up catching the barred owl, so maybe that was overall net okay. Then another banding station where a squirrel learned the net trails. And I know we don't like to think of squirrels as vicious carnivores, but they will eat a bird. And the squirrel was literally learning all of the same trails that the volunteers were walking and would follow the volunteers on a net run and try to go in and grab a bird out of a net. At Bill Baggs, we have a lot of invasive spiny-tailed iguanas. Yeah, and they love a bird in a net. So that's why we check them every 20 minutes. That's why we keep our nets high. But invasive species are a very serious concern. But I just do want to emphasize, for the most part, like, these are birds. They are prey items. It is normal for some of them to get eaten. We just have to be really conscientious because we are putting them in harm's way. So we want to be as responsible as we can to make sure that we're not causing more loss than would happen at the background rate.
How often do you do this and how many do you ban a day?
Great question. We are open for the entire fall migration season, which for us runs loosely from August 15th until November 9th, more or less. It's a weekend to a weekend. It's not, precise dates like that, but typically by this point in November, the prevailing winds are shifting and most of the birds have left. This week has been really slow at the banding station as a result. But I will show you a photo of a peak day for us in a few slides. And I will tell you that yesterday we had 8 birds.
So you monitor when they migrate south. What about when they return north?
We are trying to do that more consistently. So for South Florida, fall migration is where the action is at. Most of the birds are coming through Key Biscayne in the fall, and many of them will actually end up coming up the Gulf Coast in the spring. If you are a big birder and you want to see an amazing fallout of migratory songbirds, best place to do it, go to Fort DeSoto in the spring. Go anywhere along the Gulf Coast, you're going to see some really incredible stuff. Down here, you might get lucky. More than likely you won't. So we have not been as consistent in spring, but that is something that we're trying to do, and hopefully we will be open next spring. We were not able to open this past year. The last thing I will mention, because it was relevant this year in particular, bird banding has helped us learn a lot about disease transmission. Any diseases in the news this year that you can think of that might have something to do with birds? Avian flu, bird flu, yes. So bird banding is actually what allows us to track the spread of that. In this case, as in most cases of avian influenza, the outbreaks came from concentrated domestic animals, and for the most part, the people who were in any harm's way were chicken farmers who were dealing with large masses of birds. But other avian influenza outbreaks actually do come from wild populations of large flocks of birds like ducks and geese. There are banders who specialize in studying ducks and geese, and they can be the ones who actually sound the alarm when it seems like those birds are starting to display symptoms. So I mentioned that you can report a bird band that you find. This is how that data helps us. These are recoveries just through 2023. We've had a few more recoveries since then, but I haven't had time to add them to this map. The yellow dots are birds that were banded here on Key Biscayne, but were recovered somewhere else. You can see, for example, I'm really proud of this one. This is a little prairie warbler that we banded and then was recaught in Puerto Rico. We have birds that were banded elsewhere and recaptured at Cape Florida, another bird in Puerto Rico. We've also had birds that were banded in Cuba and have been captured at Bill Baggs. And of course, lots of birds that were banded somewhere in the northeastern United States and that we capture. So we've had quite a few exchanges, but you can probably sense like that's not very many dots on the map for 20 years. It's really, really rare to get recoveries. It's less than about 1% of bird bands will ever be reported or ever seen again. So it can be a little bit disheartening to not hear back from all of these little birds that you have banded, but it makes those few times that you do hear back all the more satisfying. The good thing is also we do get a lot of what we call recaptures, which are not recoveries. These are birds that we see multiple times over the season. We have a magnolia warbler right now that for some reason really loves to be abducted by aliens and keeps landing in our nets. Unfortunate for him, we're getting really great data. He is gaining weight, so that's fantastic. but that data is also really helpful. So here is how it is going so far this season. This is that big day when you ask me how many birds do we band in a day. Every single bag on that line has a bird. That was all one net run. By the end of that day, I was exhausted, I needed a drink, and I had banded 130 birds. And we were closed for several hours in the middle of that just to process. So remember I said bird safety is super important. While this is really exciting and I'm smiling in that photo, right after that photo was taken, I became very, very stressed and was just trying to process these birds as quickly as possible. So far this season, as of yesterday, we have banded 1,452 birds. Hopefully today they broke 1,500. We've been open every day since August 15th, as I said, and this was our biggest day of the season, which was October 3rd with 130 birds banded. Not super high diversity, only 8 species out of the 39 that we've encountered this season, but that happens. When it's a big migration day, it tends to be specific species. Of those 130 birds, 72 of them were oven birds. I never wanted to see an oven bird again. I was tired of them. They're very, very cute. I'm mostly joking. And then the next day we also banded another, I want to say 90 birds. So that was a good movement weekend. That first weekend of October was really good. Thank you so much, and I would love to take any other questions. We get a lot of questions about, do you band X? So the mist nets are sized specifically for the species you are targeting. So because we are a migratory songbird station, our mist nets are sized to have openings of 30 millimeters. Very small. So pretty much just your thumb will fit through that hole, so a pelican is not going to get caught.
Where do they come in?
Yeah, I don't know specifically about your pelicans and where they are coming and going because I don't study them. However, that is really common for a lot of our more coastal and pelagic birds. They'll have foraging grounds that are different from their roosting grounds. So at night, they might roost somewhere different, and then in the morning they'll all decide, you know what, that little spot over the ocean over there seems to be really popular with the fish this morning. That's where I'm headed. So you will see that quite frequently with pelicans, frigate birds. Most of them are going to spend the night somewhere different than they are going to plan to be eating the next day.
But do you catch things like the different types of birds that have like moved into Florida? You know, you have like the little parakeets that
Yeah.
live everywhere now. There's an African hornbill that just keeps moving up and down the coast.
I know.
So, you know, things like that have like moved in that are not native. Do you ever catch birds like that?
So Ramya was asking if we ever catch any non-native bird species at the station. So I've shown you a lot of pictures of native species, things that migrate naturally through this area, but there are lots of introduced parrots in South Florida. To my knowledge, we have not caught a single parrot in all these years. I'm not entirely sure what we would do. We couldn't ban them if we did catch one. Not even sure we'd be allowed to release it, frankly. So it has not been an issue because they're not generally using that habitat type. I can get back to you on the implications of that when I start banding at the zoo next year, hopefully, because we might catch a couple of parakeets, and I will have to figure that out.
They're gonna start banding at the zoo.
So I will try to get back to you on that, but we have not caught any non-natives in that sense. However, we do catch what birders call vagrants relatively frequently. So those are birds that were blown here by the wind. So if you have a hurricane like Dorian, for example, went over the Bahamas and then came over Florida, we were banding during that time. And shortly after that, birders in South Florida were all in a tizzy because there were like all of these random banana quits and honey creepers that came out of nowhere. They didn't come out of nowhere, they came from the islands. So we do ban some vagrants because of that. We have had a couple of Bahamian species.
Yes. Project.
Who funds the project? Great question. Viewers like you. No, in all seriousness, we are, as Julie said at the beginning, we're entirely volunteer operated. My day job is as the Avian Conservation Programs Manager at Zoo Miami. So we're kind of getting in-kind funding that allows me to be out at the banding station 4 days a week, which is very generous of them. But beyond that, all of our volunteers, all of the operational costs, that's strictly coming from donations. So hopefully we will have our Give Miami Day page up and running. You can find us under the Friends of Cape Florida page in a few days. Hopefully I'll get that information to you. But volunteers and donations, that is our bread and butter. And grants, yes, thank you for that reminder. We were very lucky to get a grant from the Rotary Club Key Biscayne earlier this year, and that has been extremely helpful. So feel free to come and find me if you have more questions about how you can support. But for now, I would love to direct all of you to all of the amazing charities on Give Miami Day. Woodpeckers. Great question. We do ban woodpeckers. They think your finger is a piece of wood. It can be painful. They're generally not migratory. So we, at the station, we will incidentally capture some resident birds like woodpeckers, like northern cardinals. I was telling some folks before the talk began, while it does happen, it doesn't happen often because thankfully birds are quite smart. And most of the time, once they learn where a net is, they're not going to be caught again. So most of the time when we do catch something like a woodpecker or a cardinal, it's a juvenile. It's looking a little rough. It doesn't really know what it's doing while it's flying around in the forest, and it hasn't learned where the nets are. That might happen for the first 2-3 weeks of the season, and then we won't see resident birds for most of the rest of the season. But our woodpeckers here in South Florida are primarily residents. If they do migrate, it's only very locally. Like a woodpecker might be born at Crandon and come down to Bill Bags, but not very far.
Do you plan to publish any books?
Do we plan to publish any books? Well, we do publish papers, and we work with scientists to make sure that the information is getting out there. Haven't really thought about publishing any books yet. If you have ideas, feel free to come find me. I have a very long list of things to do, but we might get there eventually. Yes.
Population of raptors in the park?
Any significant population of raptors in the park? Great question. Using the park consistently year-round, probably not any more special than anywhere else in South Florida. They've got great food. We've got lots of Cooper's hawks, sharp-shinned hawks, red shoulders that live in the park all throughout the year. That said, during migration, one thing I neglected to mention, most of our songbirds are migrating at night. Anybody have any guesses why a bird that normally seems to be pretty active in the day would choose to fly at nighttime? That is certainly why I drive at night. No, it turns out raptors like to fly in the daytime when they're migrating. So during the same migration season, if you're out at the banding station, when we are having a nice strong north wind, so a wind blowing from the north to the south, you can look up at any given time and you'll see lots of raptors overhead. Most of the time they are booking it and just continuing to go, but it does lead to, in early October, we have a huge explosion in the merlin population, which is a small falcon that will transit through here on its way to the Keys and south to the islands in South America. So they definitely do take advantage of the fact that we are providing lots of habitat for their food sources, but beyond that, year-round, probably not any more special than anywhere else in South Florida for raptors.
Maybe this was just a rumor, but I remember hearing there was a boa constrictor.
I'm sure. Yes, have been boas, there have been pythons. Unfortunately, we are in South Florida, and there are lots of things that are not supposed to be here that are out here. Thankfully, we did not encounter any of those things at the banding station, and they did not take any of our birds to our knowledge, but yes, there are a lot of invasive species out there. So one of the other projects that I've been working on in collaboration with the banding station area is a study on white-crowned pigeons, which are severely underappreciated, I think, native South Florida species. They're actually very limited in their range. They're found across the Caribbean and the Bahamas and South Florida. We're kind of the northernmost extent of their range. And they are really unique because they eat almost exclusively poison wood. I don't know if any of you are particularly big fans of those trees, but it turns out most of your fellow Miami-Dade County residents were also not fans of those trees and got rid of a lot of them. Thankfully, many of them have been replanted, and that's what is allowing the white-crowned pigeon to come back, but we are looking into those because we have a decent population on Bill Bags and are trying to understand if they're changing their behavior as well. But they are elusive, I will say. That pretty much brings us to the end of what I wanted to share with you all, but I do want to invite you to please stay tuned. You can follow along with our exploits at capefloridabanding.wordpress.com or just Google Cape Florida Banding Station. We will come right up. We are also on social media, if you are interested, at Cape FL Banding on Instagram. And we would love for all of you to just follow along with our progress. I know a lot of people get really excited reading our blogs over the migration season. It'll give you a sense of what to look for in your own backyards because we're banding them in your backyard. Oh, thank you. Well, thank you very much, and I hope you will all keep in touch. Feel free to come find me if you have any more questions.